So I'm going to mute everybody. All right, you can unmute yourself when you want, but just a sec. All right, so you can unmute anybody if you want when you want to talk. I've muted everybody.
Muted everybody.
I thought I did.
Just see if I can ask him if he can hear you.
Not muted, it looks like.
All right. So I muted, I think, everybody at this point. So we're here for the May 14th, 2020 Planning Board meeting for Baldwin. We have a fairly full agenda, so we're going to get right to it. The first thing that I wanted to do on the agenda was to review the minutes from the couple of prior meetings. Nicole sent out 4 minutes. One was for the December 12th, 2019 meeting. One was for the January 23rd, 2020 meeting. The third one was for the February 27th, 2020 meeting. And the last one was for the April 23rd, 2020 meeting. I'd entertain a motion by anybody on the board for one or all of those meeting minutes.
I have a question.
Yes.
I was looking for something in those minutes that I thought happened in the last 2, maybe 3 months, and I didn't see it. And that, David, was when you asked Gary Brown whether Nature's Wilderness had sold off or given away any property, and he said no. And I thought that was important to record.
Yeah, that was the December meeting, I believe. Because it's changed since then. I mean, there was a sale since then, I guess.
Actually, the conveyance to Jane Dunlap was November 11, and the conveyance to Cortland Alexander was November 19.
Joe, I can say that there were some meetings that we did already approve. And so that this isn't every meeting that's happened since then. And I also think there might have been one meeting that I missed and didn't have the minutes for, but I'm not totally sure. These were the ones that I had not submitted yet that I had taken minutes for. So it could have happened. I could have missed it in the minutes, or it could have happened at a meeting that isn't in this bundle of meetings.
Could have happened.
So
No problem.
We could do 2 things. We could, because they're recorded, so it's easy to find. Oh, not it's easy, but it could be found. If you think it's material to the minutes, we can table consideration of these minutes, and I can look through the previous minutes or the previous meetings to see if it's in the minutes in the meeting, and then make sure it's reflected in the minutes before we approve these, just to be cautious.
Can you hear me, David?
I can, Wes.
When that topic came up, I made a correction, and it was discussed, and everybody agreed that that land transaction was made.
Right, but there was a previous meeting where I posed the question, and the answer was that nothing had been transferred. I don't remember the date. I thought it might be December, but it may have been before December. So that's what Joe's referring to, not the more recent discussion where we talked about the conveyance.
Okay.
So would you like to go on that approach, Joe, to hold the meeting minutes until we can take a look at that particular issue?
That sounds good to me. Thank you.
Okay. Any second on the motion to table? Yes, Nicole.
Well, I'm just curious because it's obviously it's difficult when we get so behind on approving minutes, and a big factor, and maybe this will never happen again, so it's a non-issue, but we had a public hearing that ran for multiple meetings, and then when we had a public hearing, we never reviewed the minutes. I don't know if that's standard or if that's something we could change in the future, taking a minute to approve minutes before we do a public hearing.
Yeah, we definitely should. That was those were long meetings and there was a lot going on, and I think we just lost track of it for a couple meeting minutes.
As the historian, I could say that historically we have not kept minutes of public hearings.
Right. He's just saying that because we had the public hearing, we never actually talked about the minutes, and that was a shortcoming by your leadership. So, any second on the motion to table the review of the minutes until the next meeting?
I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Can I add to that though? Can we approve last meeting's minutes? Because we know it didn't happen then.
Sure.
It's true. Oh. And on the floor is right now to approve the last meeting minutes, which was April 23rd, 2020. I heard Joe say sure, which I'll take as a second. All those in favor, raise your hand. Appears to be unanimous. And so the consideration of the 3 other minutes that were put out there, we will table and take up at the next meeting, subject to this attempt to clarify that one issue. All right. Give me a second here. I just have to make sure no one's in the queue to come in. No one's in the queue to come in. So the next item that we had on the agenda was the discussion of the subdivision ordinance. And this was inspired by Bob, actually. He went online and looked up I mean, you can, and I'll let Bob talk about it if you want, but he looked up the state subdivision law, which we at one time probably paralleled, but since it's been a while, there may be some differences. And in the state statute, it talked about if there is a different definition of subdivision than what's in the statute, that we're supposed to change ours to be compliant by January 1st, 2021. And if we do have a conflicting requirement that we're supposed to provide some sort of notice by June 30th, 2020, maybe at the last minute, I couldn't remember if I sent this out before, the state subdivision definition was put onto the Baldwin website, and Bob was kind enough to highlight the pertinent section on page 3 about the requirements for the state law. Interesting, and that's one issue. So one issue, and Bob, I'll give you to talk about in a sec. One issue is what, if anything, we have to do to our ordinance to comply with state law. That's issue 1, and we're going to have to look at that. Issue 2 is, it's actually interesting, the state definition of tract or parcel of land is slightly different than ours, and so it's interesting to see the differences. Bob, why don't I give you the floor if you want to talk about whatever I didn't talk about and what you think is important about this.
Okay. My interest was piqued when Joe made a comment about transfer of land and changing the status of you know, when the road was there, what that did and if selling the land made any difference. So I went on to the state statutes for subdivision, and they have a definition section in statute 4401. And in there, they have the issue of the tract of land, and it has a date on it. So if the road was there before, what is the date? September 22nd, 1971, then it divides the land. If it wasn't there before that, then it doesn't. And so it's one parcel. But they're looking at it again, there are a number of other definitions in there where we are not in sync with the statute. And it will come up, I think, in our discussion later today, like the issue of selling land to an abutter. And that's in this definitions section of the statute, but it's not in our subdivision ordinance. I'm almost to the point, well, I think that we should probably ask MMA what our requirements are, whether the statutes hold or whether the town's subdivision ordinance. Because I noticed that MMA quoted that abutter's sale to an abutter in their opinion that they gave to Wes. And there are a number of other places where our subdivision ordinance differs in the definition area. And not to get into it too much, but my understanding is that this whole thing came up as a result of a question about somebody trying to develop a campground, and it resulted in a state court decision and later a study by the state planning office to standardize subdivision ordinances around the state so that developers and landowners and whatnot had a common set of rules to play by. And I believe that the statute, from what I've read, and MMA can clarify this, but the statute is the minimum requirements. And there are a few areas where we can add some more definitions to subdivisions if it matches a local land use plan. Like if we want to discourage development on farmland, then there may be scope to do that. But I think if we're supposed to pretty much use the statute as the minimum or as the baseline, with a few exceptions. There's a few areas in there where you can vary from it. But I would suspect that we probably ought to ask MMA what their opinion is, because these issues I think we're talking about last week or last meeting and at this meeting as well.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I might be able to help you out with that without going
Yes.
to MMA. Bob is correct in the sense that the subdivision law is the law, and it is the minimum requirement that the community has to have in their regulations as it relates to subdivision. So you can be more restrictive if you choose to, but you can't be less restrictive. So you're going to want to do a full assessment at some point of your subdivision regulation to see if it meets the state law minimum requirements. As it relates to campgrounds, as long as a piece of property is under a unified ownership, i.e. one person, that does not constitute a subdivision. It would be the same as a mobile home park. If a mobile home park is owned by a developer and puts in 25 lots or 50 lots, it is not a subdivision, provided it's on one piece of land. Relevant to, just quickly, and I'm not sure what the whole discussion is or was, but relevant to making development more restrictive on agricultural land versus any place else, that is not a subdivision issue. That is a zoning issue. So unless the town has townwide zoning, you can't regulate that through subdivision. I'll leave it at that. That's what I had heard discussed, so I just thought I could help you out without having to go to MMA for something like that.
I think that is helpful. I think that is helpful. Yeah, Bob.
I didn't want to suggest that the campground was tied up in this question about their subdivision ordinance, but that was the issue that that brought it to I think it went to the state Supreme Court, and in 2001, there's a paper on it actually, is when it the state planning office did a study statewide of the various subdivision ordinances.
So what I think and I appreciate Bob you bringing this forward, because sometimes we don't even know these things are out there. So what I propose, and I'll throw it out there, and the board can shoot me down or can find it to be the right path. I think we should do two things. One is to take time out of our meeting, actually to probably have two volunteers to look through the subdivision ordinance and compare our ordinance to the state ordinance and find the differences. We could probably hire somebody to do it if we wanted to hire somebody to do it, but it doesn't seem that hard to put them side by side, and then report back to the board, and then understand what the differences are. I think that's the first challenge. The second challenge is what to do about it, but I don't think we're there yet until we know what the changes are. That's A. B, I'd like to go forward based on our subdivision ordinance with the things in front of us, because I don't know how long it's going to take to find out the differences and what impact those differences are. I'd rather just go forward with what the town of Baldwin has voted in and not wait to see if we should be following the state or should be following something else. But those are the two aspects that I see. Does that make sense, or does the board want to wait to see which one we're supposed to follow legally and what the differences are and how we implement it? So I'll toss it out to the board for comment. Joe DeNicol.
I think it would be good to compare our ordinance to the state ordinance and to understand that state law rather, and get to that point before we make any more decisions.
Nicole, what do you think?
I was actually going to say the same thing. I think that if we run the risk of doing something that technically is against state law, that seems problematic. Makes sense that we try and figure out if we're out of line somewhere before we proceed.
Bob, yeah.
There's two issues I think that we're up against. One is the road division issue, and the other is the abutters selling to an abutter not being a division of the property. And if we were to do our reviews using the state statute, I think we'd be fine. We wouldn't have a problem.
My concern is it's not what Baldwin passed, so I feel like I've been charged to implement what the town of Baldwin has passed, and I don't disagree with you in the sense of if it's state law, how can we go wrong? But it's not what Baldwin passed, so I don't know. Yeah, Nicole.
Well, because the other fear, I mean, thinking about what Lee J said, if our town ordinance happens to be more restrictive in one area, right, we need to follow that. So we need to know where, we can't just follow state law and proceed, right? Because our town ordinance may be more restrictive.
And more restrictive is okay. It's making sure that there's nothing that's less restrictive someplace that is the issue.
No, understood, but I wouldn't want to make a decision based just on state law and ignore the Baldwin ordinance, because then we'd be ignoring what the townspeople want and what they've passed.
I would
Joe?
volunteer to work with Bob on this. I'm not as computer savvy and so forth as Bob is on how to manipulate the verbiage and so forth, but I'm interested in the topic, and so I'm motivated to help.
Okay.
Okay, great. Great. So Bob and Joe, why don't you take on that task? For the next meeting, we'll have the next meeting, right? Because there's no holiday. Yeah. So for the next meeting, if you guys could tell us what the differences are. If it's too big of a job, just come back and tell us that. There's no expectation that you're gonna stay up late at night, but let's do that now. So what do we want to do about the things in front of us? Do we want to at least talk about them and maybe look at both definitions? I think they're pretty finite questions that we're dealing with in terms of the statutory definition. So maybe let's look at both of them if we can and see where we go. Matt's doing something. Where are you going, Matt?
Sorry, I'm just trying to get some headphones set up.
Ah. All right. So great. So that was the second issue. So the two other issues we have, and there's really kind of three issues, but the two other, I'm just moving things. The two other issues that are in front of us are, generally speaking, what's called the Van Hertel issue, which has a whole bunch of sub-issues. And there's actually two subparts to the Van Hertel issue. And Nature's Wilderness, continuing the discussion of the campground and the conditions on that. So let's talk about the Van Hertel issue first, if the Nature's Wilderness people are okay with it. I don't think it's going to be half as long as the Nature's Wilderness discussion. So so the Van Hertel issue has become a bit of a bear. So let me talk about what I understand to be out there, and maybe somebody can correct me. So Van Hertel owned two parcels of property. I think it's map 194 and map 193. So map 193 is essentially the land between Fremont Street, formerly known as Smut Street, and Route 113. And there's a bunch of smaller parcels that were cut out of that, like the Dodge Oil and some other ones. But essentially, it's that large parcel of property. That's Van Hertel, Lot 1, Map 1, Lot 93. That's number one. Now, on that, there's a sub-issue of somebody looking to do a subdivision on that parcel, and they, I think it was yesterday, maybe it was the day before, submitted papers on potentially doing a subdivision on a part of that Van Hertel property. All right, so that's issue one. Issue 2 is Van Hertel, map 1, lot 94. And that's the parcel of property that again starts at Smut Street or Fremont Street and goes all the way up to
Cram Road.
Cram Road. It goes all the way up to Cram Road on 107. So it basically goes along 107 from Fremont to Cram. It used to be Cram Hill Road. That's what I was trying to think of. What it's Cram Road. So that's the second Van Hertel issue. That Van Hertel issue actually has 4 or 5 sub-issues because we have a subdivision. We have 2 subdivision proposals in front of us on either side of Sam Pond Road, 2 6-pack subdivisions. And then they're going down 107. There's a series of other issues regarding that property. And that's Van Hertel, lot 190, map 1, lot 94 issue. So there's 2 issues, and then there's sub-issues amongst those. Does that make sense so far? Nod your head if you're with me. All right. So the second Van Hertel issue, the map 1, lot 94 that goes up 107, Wes has been providing us information to try to figure out if the various separation of property have created a subdivision other than the 2 proposed subdivisions that we've received. Wes has given us some drawings, has given us some partial deeds. Ben Thompson actually gave us another drawing did you want to say something, Danielle?
I'm sorry, Gary just got lost connection and trying to get back in.
Just admitted him, sorry. I can't click and talk at the same time. Thank you. Sorry about that, Gary. Apologize, Gary, sorry about that. So Ben Thompson also gave us a map that has been distributed to the board that also provided some information about the different separations and when things were transferred. And it seems like to me the only issue that Wes has really asked us to look at is whether or not the private roads, there's 2 of them, it's Grant and another one that cross the land, whether or not those 2 private roads separated out the parcels such that a sale of the land on either side of the private road did not create a division for the purpose of the subdivision ordinance. And he presented some information on that, and that appears to be the question in front of the board. So that's the question there. If you go back to the other parcel of property, there's a whole bunch of other questions, because what Van Hertel did was he took the large parcel, he sold a sliver of it to a butter across the street of Smut Street, Fremont Street, and then sold another part of it to I think it was to Ted, wasn't it? Or it may not have been Ted. It sold it to somebody else who wants to put a subdivision on that one as well. And so that's we have questions there about how that whole subdivision is going to look and what those issues are. So that's kind of what I think are the issues with the two Van Hertel properties. The six-pack subdivisions, they submitted them and they never came back. So I'm not sure if they're still pursuing those. I assume they are. But so Wes, with that as a preface, what were you expecting us to do tonight?
To look at the second property that Ted has wants to form, and that second property will make the count of properties 3 and make a subdivision.
Okay, so you want us to look at the lot 193A property that's between Smut Street and Fremont Street and 113. That's what you want us to look at tonight?
Correct.
Okay. I'm not prepared to review the subdivision request. Joe?
So my question here would be about the remainder property that neither Michelle Bukovekis nor Ted Terrio bought, but I guess Van Hertel retained. And how does that relate to any subdivision application, because it's part of the mother lot?
I can contribute to that.
Sure.
Okay. Van Hertel bought that whole plot of ground. The division that sort of cuts in half that Van Hertel retained and sold the rest of to Ted, that division line was made 2 years ago, and it was verified by the engineering firm, I think it's BH2M, that is representing Van Hertel in their subdivision. They verified that line was brand new 2 years. So the land that Van Hertel has retained will be lot 1 that is counted in part of the 3 divisions. Therefore, the other half that was sold to Ted, he sold a chunk to Bukovakis that's an exempt, and he has one for building on. So now that's the second lot. Now he wants to take that second lot and divide it once more and make a third lot. Okay.
Okay, I moved beyond talking about Ted Terrio because David Strock said he didn't want to look at that subdivision tonight. My concern going forward will be Ted Terrio goes his direction with the land he's retained. Now what happens if Van Hertel decides to do something with the land that he's retained? We have never had that sort of thing happen where a mother lot gets divided in 2, and you've then got 2 different people. One wants to get a subdivision, the other, we don't know what they want to do. I'm unclear, and I'd like to be clear. What happens to Van Hertel's rights on that property? Could he subdivide it? Would it affect the first subdivision?
The answer, as I see it, is that whole mother lot is subject to subdivision because none of the divisions have outlived the 5-year rule. So whether Ted starts dividing his half or Hertel starts dividing his portion, they all will fall into their own actions, their own subdivision.
See, I disagree. I think that I disagree. I think that if the mother lot has been separated out 3 times, then the entire mother lot needs to be subject to the subdivision proposal, and that the entire property is part of the subdivision. It's not just the corner lot that is where the proposed subdivision on. It would be the entirety of Van Hertel's property, because it would the property would have been divided 3 or more times in a non-exempt way within 5 years. So we need a subdivision application that covers the entire Van Hertel mother lot, which includes Van Hertel's Van Hertel's property, the property sold to how do you say Bukovecus, and then the property on the corner. That all three of those would be subject to the subdivision because the Van Hertel lot in the last 5 years has been separated out. And it only comes into play if either the Bukovacoviches or Ted wants to separate, or Van Hertel, frankly, wants to separate out their property within 5 years. That's the way I see it. I don't think the sale to Bukovacovics, while it's exempt for the purpose of the subdivision ordinance, it doesn't form a barrier that suddenly the folks on the other side of that sale can do whatever they want.
I basically agree with what you're formulating, and Hertel's land is already being counted as lot 1 of the potential 3 lots, so it's already included.
Right, but when we get a subdivision application, we need to know what is going to happen to the entire property. Like, it's all part of the subdivision application. So although there's 3 owners, they all have to come in front of us and say, this is what we're going to do as a subdivision on that parcel of property.
The subdivision application is in with that packet of, I think, 18 pages that Ted has turned in. So I think.
But he's only
part of
talking about
tonight's
he's only talking about his 14 acres. He's not talking about the entire 93 acres or whatever it is. Bob, you had
I don't
something,
understand.
you raised
What
your
does it
hand.
take
Right.
to?
Yeah, I just want to say, the sale to Bukovacs as an abutter is a division of property in accordance with our subdivision ordinance. We don't have the exception in there for sale to an abutter. That's in the state statute, but not in ours. And that's why I said earlier that it impacts this discussion tonight. So if the way I see it, and I agree with you, David, everybody in there in that whole division gets impacted what happens downstream. The clock starts ticking, right, when the first division takes place. And whether you're owner on one side of the line or the other, you're impacted by that event. And according to our subdivision ordinance, the Bukovacs was the first division. And so anything after that falls under the subdivision ordinance.
We don't have an exception for a sale to an abutter. I thought we did.
I can't find it.
Yes, there is. It's documented in emails, a receipt from MMA, and they ruled that the Bukovacs was exempt and they are considered a butter.
Right.
Yeah,
We're
that's
talking-
because reading
as
the
Bob
state-
said, that was under the state ordinance. So the state ordinance wouldn't, what we're trying to figure out, and that's why Bob started this conversation with which one applies, the state ordinance or the Baldwin ordinance?
I'm gonna keep quiet on this and let it run its course between the with the planning board.
Other voices on this?
Yes, I think I just found it. On page 7, at the top of the subdivision ordinance, a division accomplished by devised condemnation, order of court, gift to a person related to the donor by blood, marriage, or adoption, or a gift to a municipality, or a transfer of any interest in land to the owner of land abutting that land does not create a lot or lots for the purpose of these regulations. So it is, we do have that exception in our ordinance.
It isn't a butter, is it defined as a person across the street?
It does not say. It says owner of land abutting that land. That's it.
Ted, do you want to say something? I can unmute you. There you go. You're unmuted.
Joe, what line is that on?
Here, just a sec. Ted's going to say something. It's at the very
Can you
top
hear
of
me
the page. Yes, Ted.
Your Article 2 in definitions, I think it's 2.2, abutting property. The definition of that is any lot which is physically contiguous with the lot in question, even if only at a point in any lot which is located directly across a public street or away from the lot in question. So your own ordinance claims that people across the street can be abutters.
Are you in the land use ordinance or the subdivision ordinance?
It's land use.
Okay. So then there's the question of whether or not the land use definitions apply to the subdivision. That's.
Oh, I agree that it's in there. It's mixed in with a lot of other things. So,
Bob, I'm looking at page 7, the top of the page of the subdivision ordinance.
yeah, I see it there. It's mixed in with the issue of adoption and gift to municipalities and all that stuff. Yep.
So it's an interesting question that Ted raises. Is in our land use ordinance, we do define somebody across the street as I think it is in the butter. It's not defined in the separate subdivision ordinance. So should we use the definitions in the land use ordinance to answer this question? Because the only place I saw, just to toss it out, is if you go to tract or parcel of land, page 7, second to last definition in the subdivision ordinance, it talks about a tract or parcel of land is all contiguous land in the same ownership, provided that lands located on opposite sides of a public or private road shall be considered each a separate tract or parcel of land unless the road was established by the owner of the land on both sides thereof. That was the only place I saw that the subdivision ordinance talked about the impact of a road. Who's laughing?
It's funny.
I'm amused too, Bob.
I think I'm frustrated.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Nicole.
I was just looking for, I thought there was something in the subdivision ordinance near the beginning that talks about like things not defined here are incorporated in the land use ordinance or something. Isn't there some line like that, or am I making that up?
So under definitions, it says, in general, words and terms used in these regulations shall have their customary dictionary meanings. More specifically, any word or term defined in the Baldwin zoning ordinance shall have the definition contained in that ordinance unless defined differently below. Other words and terms herein shall be defined as follows. You nailed it, Nicole. Good job.
So I think in that way, That's what I was looking at, but I didn't know, but what threw me off was Baldwin zoning ordinance, but I think that means then the definition of an abutter is the same.
I'd agree. Ted, can you remind me, what was the definition that you were reading there? What was was it a butter? Is that?
The definition of, that question came up before we started this was, before we wanted to do anything with Michelle, it was, is she considered an abutter? You know what I'm saying? And we found this definition, which nailed it. Said, because it threw me for a loop too, because back in the day, I mean, we all know the state rule is, there's a road dividing property, those two properties are separate lots. So Baldwin's got this definition written in here, which isn't beneath the state standard. It's actually more restrictive because of what you can do with property that's divided by a road. So this right here is something somebody had written a while back, which is actually more restrictive than the state minimum. And it's saying that stuff across the road are continuous lots.
And we're reading from 2.2 of the land use ordinance definition of abutting property. Bob.
So it gets to be a bit of an interesting question here, because according to our subdivision ordinance, the road is a state or a town road, and therefore it divides the two properties. So they are two separate lots, but she is an abutter by the other definition. I don't think it brings us any clarity here.
I'd agree. No, I think, but it does answer the question. I think it is helpful that that transfer, and I always assumed it was, that transfer did not trigger, was not counted as a parcel of one of the three parcels for separation. So, but I don't think it answers the question of if Ted wants to divide his parcel in half, so now there'll be 4 parcels off of Van Hertel's mother lot. So the Van Hertel big piece, the Bukavakis piece, and then Ted has 2 pieces. If there's that's clearly a subdivision of the Van Hertel mother lot if it happens within 5 years of the sale. If there is a subdivision that needs to be put in, does it have to do the entire Van Hertel property or just Ted's portion of that?
That's the question. I think I'm fairly sure that if Van Hertel wants to do anything in the next 3 years, then the whole subdivision has to be reopened again. I mean, for 3 years at least, it's in tandem with the whole lot. But after that, I'm not sure.
So can I have authority to go ask either David Laurie or a lawyer from the MMA this question? Because I just want to get it decided, because frankly, I don't know the answer.
Yes.
Okay. Matt Frick, are you cool with that? Okay. So I'll ask him the question so we can have some sort of definite answer. And while I'm at it, I'll ask them the question about, do we apply the state law or our law, just as a general proposition, not go into too much detail. So Ted, we can get the answer. We'll get the answer to that question, and whatever the answer is, we'll move forward with whatever, we'll let you know what the answer is.
I appreciate that, because I mean, it's not black and white with some of these things as far as trying to determine if a subdivision ordinance applies to something. My experience with these things has been somewhat limited, but we've dabbled in this before, and we found that if we acquired a piece of property that's within that 5-year period, okay, you just can't go in there and willy-nilly split it. You have to approach a planning board. If this was, 3 years, 5 years down the road, Van wouldn't even come into play. I could walk right into the lawyer's office and
I
split that
know, I know. And we get it. We get it. Yeah. But I think what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to slow growth to a somewhat of a manageable pace unless it's submitted to the board for some approvals. I think that's the way that it's viewed. But if somebody has 20 kids, they can have a subdivision overnight.
And isn't that weird? And what we noticed also is that property is village commercial. So I don't know how fast or slow you want things to grow in that particular zone. Because what is the town's position on that? Is that still, because it's all village commercial, you want people coming in with businesses on 113, they're gonna wait every 5 years to put something in? Or, I mean, I don't know. That's,
yeah.
I'm all ears. I'm here to help. We're just looking to see if we can break this lot one more time. And I'm not looking to put in 20 houses on that because it's all wet swampland. We're just looking to see if we can break that one more time and put something else in.
Yeah, I noticed you don't have a very big building envelope on that, so.
Pretty close.
All right. So Van Hertel, map 1, lot 93, we've got a plan. And I'll be able to report back next meeting on what the answer is. So, all right, so that's it with Van Hertel stuff today. You all saw the question that I posed to Wes about the road issue, right? I sent an email out to Wes that basically said for us to answer the question he's asking about map 1, lot 94, we have to know when the roads were created and by whom. And then I think we can give him an answer on that. But he hasn't figured that out yet as far as I know. He has found deeds that reference the private way, but not evidence of where it was created. And I also raised the issue that I didn't necessarily think Wes should be doing this. I thought the people who own the property who want to do something with it should be doing it. But that's, if Wes wants to do it, I'm not. That's his choice, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It just seems like it should come from the applicant, not from Wes. An applicant. I don't even think we have an applicant on most of that parcel.
May I say something?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Okay. The issue is to clear up if the roads do make land divisions, not an applicant to divide his land. The last meeting, Joe requested proof that those are private roads and not just, shall we say, dirt tire tracks going through a field. I've dug up a couple of deeds. One was dated, I think, 2005, stating Allaire Road, and it also somewhere stated that the Allaire Road is a way to provide electric service. Well, Grant Road has the electric service. So since then, the road names have changed, but the road is there. Some of those deeds were written taking descriptions from the original deed that dates, I think it was 1958. So it does go way back. But I only submitted 2 deeds. One was rather current, one was 2005. And my only purpose was to establish those are real roads, real private ways, not just by chance happen to be tracks in the field. Okay.
Right. No, I appreciate it. I think Joe asked you to send those out at the selectmen meeting on May 5th. And we do appreciate it. I mean, it's helpful to see. I think we just need one more step. So let's not get bogged down into map 194A today, because we still need some information. Let's move on to Nature's Wilderness, if we can. Ben's raising his hand.
I just had one question while you were on that subject, if I could. Does this look like a potential applicant, I guess, for Van Hertel on 194 and 194-1? Our office is still chasing him on tree growth applicant recertifications on those lots, and I just was curious what was going on your end. I don't know if you're seeing an application or.
Yeah, sure. So for lot 1, map 1, lot 94, we have 2 applications for subdivisions from Van Hertel Senior on either side of Sand Pond Road. And then farther down the property, we're at V's, and then it keeps going down 107. A company called Rise and Shine LLC has purchased that parcel, and they're interested in doing some work on that, but we have no pending application. And then farther down, there's been some rumor that there's an individual who wants to look at doing a subdivision down there, but we have nothing in front of us and nothing pending.
Currently for us, just so if this helps you, I apologize if I'm interrupting, but the upper side of lot 1, map 194 is going to be labeled 194. The lower section below Sand Pond Road is currently 194-1. And the section past the V that is currently owned by Rise and Shine LLC is map 4, lot 1-1.
Yeah, and I see that on your diagram. I see that.
Those are the lots that are currently created and going through commitment that way, just so you guys knew. So we are still chasing all 3 of those parcels for tree growth applications with no response as of yet. So I'm in the process of, we got our process we have to do to withdraw. So you got the $500 first letter penalty. I believe on a couple of these, we're moving towards the second $500 penalty. I got to check my timing on this. We didn't know some of these sales happened when they did. We'd be further down the road of actually pulling them out because of non-compliance. For example, the lower portion of below Sand Pond, that was sold in March of 2019. So he's out of compliance right now. They have 1 year to recertify. But once we note that, I got to start the long 1.5 year long process. So we're where we are. But just to let you know, currently these are still in tree growth.
Okay, perfect. And before we approve any sort of subdivision, we check with you to make sure they're not in violation of any tax issues or whatever. So
You're good.
perfect. No, I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Nature's Wilderness. So at the last meeting, we had started to look through the findings of fact and proposed conditions. We had made it, actually here, so it's going to take me a second to find my thing, but there seems to me to be 2 preliminary issues, 3 preliminary issues. Let me see if I cover them, Joe, if there's something. So there's 3 issues that I think we have to just, and it should be very short. One is the public statement by Scott that he's going to turn this from a campground, and just let me go all 3, Gary, before you respond. He's going to turn the campground into something else. And I think we all probably saw the news reports, and I hope Scott's doing good. Obviously, concerned about his health. But wondered if that changed the plan. Two, we got a new chart map, and I want to understand what that is and what it's being submitted for. And then three, there was the issue of the failure to register with the state. And on three, we just got documentation today that's fine, that's cleared up from what we understand, so that's not an issue. So it's really just the two issues. Joe, is there another preliminary issue before we start talking? And then I'm going to pass it off to Gary.
Yes, as a I'm recusing myself from this, but I do want to bring up that this is an illegal subdivision. The LLC gave the land to, what's her name, Jane, and an LLC does not have personhood and therefore cannot have an aunt or a blood relation of any kind. So this is an illegal subdivision you're considering.
Because it's been divided 3 times. We talked the 2 divisions last time. It's an LLC. Okay. All right. So, Gary, what? Just because I started. Can we do the first 2, and then we can talk about this other issue? But so, is there any change in plans based on, Scott said some stuff in the press. I just want to make sure there's no real change. And then 2, what was the thing you submitted today? You're on mute. Still on mute. There you go.
There is no change to the plans at all. What are you referring to?
I think he said he wanted to do some sort of free place for cancer survivors.
All we're doing is offering some free sites to cancer survivors. That's not a change at all.
No, that's fine. Just it raised the question. That's all. I just want to make sure we're still on the same path. And then what about the thing you submitted?
You asked at the last meeting for a updated boundary survey. So I had that done for you and sent that through Bill Chippen. That's what that is. And the second thing you asked for at the last meeting was the LLC information, which has been taken care of as well.
Yeah, I saw the LLC. That's great. That's, got that done quickly. I appreciate it. So the thing you submitted, I'm sorry, what's it called?
It was an updated survey that you asked for at the last meeting. You asked for an updated showing the property. That's what I gave you.
I apologize. I had some things going on. Working from home. So I counted up 425 acres. Is that what's left of that original lot?
That's what it said in the survey. Yes.
Okay. And then I'm not sure that we're going to stop considering this because of Joe's concern, but do you have any response to what he was saying?
As far as I'm concerned, and we've been told, it was legal divisions. There's no violations or anything written right now, so it shouldn't be an issue. We shouldn't talk about it. It was legal divisions.
So I'll to the extent that the selectmen and the CEO want to look into that, I'm going to defer to the CEO and the selectmen to address that, but I'd rather not. I'd rather not try to be the enforcement arm right now. I'd like the selectmen or the CEO to come back to us and tell us if there is an issue. And if there is an issue, then we can address it at that time.
I spoke to Les many times about this, and there is no issue with the division of land.
And the only thing I'm asking right now, Gary, is so you're coming to us as the applicant, not as a selectman. So
exactly.
So if the CEO can look at that issue or the selectmen, they're both the enforcement arm, just come back to us and let us know if there is or is not an issue with what Joe talked about, which is that the large parcel was owned by an LLC, and so it can't subdivide to a blood relative and not have it count towards a subdivision. Nickel.
I guess maybe I'm just missing a little bit of what's going on here, but what would be the third division of the property anyway? I mean, there's the mother lot. It was given some to the aunt, and then my first question is, what's the third division? And then my second question is I'm confused why we wouldn't consider that. We just spent an hour talking about subdivisions. Isn't that sort of our charge to discuss that?
Well, so Gary, there was a second parcel that was separated out from the mother lot, correct?
The one to Cortland Alexander.
You said his name, but you broke up.
Cortland Alexander, the second
Right.
lot to Cortland Alexander. Jane is also a member of the LLC. I don't know if that makes a difference in your eyes.
Like I said, I really don't want to deal with it tonight because I'd rather
I
make
don't either.
progress on the. I'd like to make progress on the CUP. I'd like the selectmen and the CEO to go do some fact finding, because without somebody coming to us and saying these are what the facts are, I think we're going to get bogged down there.
I agree.
This is Wes. I agree. I'll work with the selectmen and we'll come up with something.
Matt, Bob, do you guys agree? Nickel? Yeah, sure.
I mean, last thing I'll say about it then, because maybe I'm missing something, but to me, you're about to go talk to a lawyer about subdivision issues, and the question of a relative or a member of an LLC being part of a subdivision seems like, does that count as a division? Seems like a worthwhile question that I'm assuming the selectmen aren't going to know without asking a lawyer.
Well, just the fact that she's a member of the LLC is more information than I had before that was brought out. So that's why I was kind of hoping that the CEO could go get the facts, talk to the applicant, find out why they think it's not an issue, come back to us and say, this is why it's not an issue. And obviously, if we have concerns at that point, we can discuss it. But until then, I don't know. Bob, Matt, Bob, yeah, you have your hand raised.
I think Nickel had a good point. You're already going to go talk to MMA. You could simply ask that question.
Sure, I will. But I'd still like the selectman or the CEO to find out what the facts are and what their initial assessment is. We only have so much time here together, so that's why I'm trying to be productive. Plus, it wasn't on the agenda either, so. Although Nature's Wilderness was on the agenda. Any board member disagree with going forward? These meetings are so much harder than in person. Yeah, Nickel.
I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to understand. Because to me, if it is an illegal subdivision, then doesn't that change everything we're about to talk about?
Potentially.
So, I mean, in the interest of valuing our time, why are we continuing to talk about it is what I'm not understanding. I'm happy to do it, but I'm not following.
Mr. Fricker, do you have any insight on this? Or Mr. Sanborn?
Not that it's any of our business, but I was just curious why the subdivisions were done in kind of in the middle of a. That's I'm asking Gary anyway.
Gary, do you want to respond to that?
One quick thing. we work with Wes with this division. Everything is on the up and up. There's no violations. Why are we talking about this and arguing about it when there was no, we cleared this when we did it. We was told we was in the right and we did it. Why is this a big issue now and holding up this meeting? There's no violations. What are we talking about it for? It's not an illegal division.
Okay, so Wes, you there?
Yes, I am.
When you reviewed this issue, did you consider the fact that the property, the mother property was owned by an LLC, and whether or not that played into your discussion about if it was appropriate or not?
I mostly discussed that Jane Dunlap was the aunt of a blood relation to Scott. I did consider about the campground being an LLC. Scott is the major stockholder in the LLC, so as a person being the major stockholder, he is also the major landowner, and Dunlap is a relative. Another way to look at it is, although there's an LLC there, the campground has not received a CUP and has not received a license from the state, so it's not really a campground yet.
And Gary, the person that was sold to, is it also a member of the LLC?
Yes.
No, I was not aware that she had interest in the LLC.
All right, I'll ask the lawyer about that. It's enough information that I can ask the lawyer. Joe, do you have another question?
Well, I guess, to answer Gary, why it's brought up now is that, Gary, you didn't tell us about this transfer of land until relatively recently. It's a change of the application. And my point is that an LLC does not have personhood. It's not a person. We form LLCs in order to avoid personal responsibility, personal liability. It's a limited liability company. And therefore, there are restrictions that come with the privileges. And the restriction is that you give up your personhood. Scott Efron owns apparently part, not all, of the LLC. And so we're sloppy in how we talk about things because the LLC owns the land. Scott doesn't own the land. The LLC owns the land. We just say, oh, Scott must own the land, but he doesn't. The limited liability company owns the LLC, and the limited liability company does not have an aunt or a son or a daughter or anything. It's just a company.
Matt, did you have a question?
Well, yeah. I thought we had agreed to do the CUP in phases, and that this CUP is just considering phase 1, which is a smaller parcel of land. Now, no?
No, we're considering a
It's
CUP for the entire 425 acres. We're
okay. All right,
we're
but
only
the-
considering allowing the construction of phase 1 until certain parameters are met that we haven't got to yet.
Okay, so the conditions that we apply are only for phase 1. That's why we're not addressing any of the DEP or road issues or anything like that.
Actually, they in the most recent revised submission, they brought the total campground number down to a point, even after all phases are built, that they would be below the threshold to require a DOT traffic. The DEP is still involved, but the key issue that had to do with size was the DOT. traffic movement study or traffic movement permit or whatever it was.
My only thought was, does this subdivision issue apply if we're only looking at phase one, but since the CUP is for the entire 400 some acre property and the, the ownership of the whole thing, then it does apply. So.
Okay.
Never
Yeah, like I
mind.
said, I'll ask the lawyer about it and come back and let you know what either David Laurie or the MMA, depending on who. I'll talk to you, Dwight, and we can talk about who I should go to for it. So, all right. So my recollection of where we were at, and Lee J is still there, but he has his camera off. Nobody's trying to get in. And Lee J, you probably wrote a note saying stopped here, but my recollection is we were somewhere around emergency preparedness on the document that's entitled Findings of Fact and Conclusions of Law, and we were walking through this just to make sure that we agreed with what you had kind of documented. Is that consistent with what you remember, Lee J?
It is that we were walking our way through it. I actually have us stopped at the top of what I call page 9, which would be F, which is number of sites.
Perfect. That's right where I was too.
Okay.
So as we did last time, what I would like to do is to walk through the document. This document's available on the Baldwin website as one of the documents in preparation for the meeting today. I'd like to continue to walk through it, and I'll kind of summarize as we go, but if any board member has questions, raise your hand, we can talk about it. If the applicant would like to make comments, same thing. Lee J will be kind of documenting any changes that we agree to as a board. If members of the public want to say something, I'll allow limited discussion, but we're not in a public hearing. So, Baldwin's prided itself on being community oriented. So I'm not going to shut people out completely, but by the same token, we've got to make some progress here. So talking about the number of sites. So it says, number of sites, the park will not be permit the placement of any RVs or tents exceeding the number approved by the town of Baldwin and the state of Maine. This actually ties into the charts that were provided because they have laid out with pretty excruciating detail where the campsites are going to be and where they're located. So the applicant would be restricted to that presentation and those sites. Is everybody in agreement on that? All right. Primitive recreation, hiking, biking, equestrian, limited to the campground property and the abutting surrounding lands. I'm not sure what that means. Either Lee J or the applicant, can you talk about what you mean by the abutting surrounding lands?
As far as what? Like trails or anything like that?
Well, my understanding.
Well, I think what it means is we have the big acreage, a full 100 and X amount of acres, but we brought it down to the project site, the campground to a project site. And I think that's what it means. The campground's going to use the remaining land that's in the map 7 lot 22.
Yeah, I don't like calling it the abutting surrounding lands because it's not, they're not abutting. It's the 425 acres.
I think that's a holdover from the original application and probably should be massaged.
I would like to reference the survey that was submitted as the scope of the area that the use can include.
So I think probably the easiest way to change this wording would be to simply say all hiking, biking, and equestrian uses will be limited to the campground property, period. And then mounted maps will be posted at various points through the trail system, and then finishing that off. So the whole piece that states and abutting surrounding lands based upon written agreement between the campground and the landowner that may be created, amended from time to time would be stricken from that statement.
I agree. Because we were pretty clear that we're limiting this to the 425 acres.
Exactly, and all the trails stay on it. Nothing leaves that property. We're in agreement with that as well.
Yeah. And somewhere down the road, if a landowner wants to do something, they can come back to the board with you and get a CUP for that use on their property.
We're not going to need to. We have plenty of land of our own.
Never know. Things get bigger, faster, stronger. All right. Mounted maps will be posted throughout the trail systems and in the clubhouse. Maps will be updated to reflect the current. So I would strike that last sentence too, because we're not going to have current land agreements. So, Lee J, do you think this is a place where we should put some sort of restriction or condition that the edge of the campground property be posted with signage noting that it's the end of the campground property?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with that at all from my standpoint. I know it's been discussed. I'm wondering if it is someplace else in here, but it can't hurt to be redundant with that sort of thing. So if you want to put it on there, we can add that.
Yeah, I would. Again, board members, if anybody disagrees or if you want to, I was just checking to see if there's any comments. If you want to talk, just let me know. H, ATV use. Campground proposes to allow ATV within the use within the land owned by the applicant, described as lot 22 on town map 7. Is it 22-7? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And is that the 425 acres?
Yes.
Okay. This land area contains existing trails. The campground expects to prepare additional trail network. Applicants propose to reserve the right to obtain permission from a So I think we said no to that. The applicant is proposing to reserve the right to permit permission from abutting landowners for trail maintenance and access in an effort to expand ATV use to use the established trail network located in this part of the state. I think the applicant was pretty clear that the trails would only be used by people at the campground, so connecting them to other trails wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, I thought we came to that agreement that we're keeping all the trails in the property.
Yeah. So Lee J, if we could strike that.
Yeah, it's a fairly lengthy statement, so I'll need a minute or two here to try and massage that. But
I would just strike it.
Strike the whole thing.
The whole sentence from the applicant is proposing all the way to part of the state.
Okay,
Just that
I got
sentence.
it. Yeah, I got you.
All trails existing and proposed. All trails existing and proposed are to be mapped and the property/use limits clearly posted on the trails. Campground will display a series of maps along the trail system, will publish trail maps for renters. Renters of the campground, not ATVs, right?
Yeah, no, we don't offer ATV rentals.
Yeah. Trail map attached to the submittal, which we've seen. Signs be placed at the perimeter defining the trail limits. Okay, DJ, it's right here. You're right. You're right. ATV traffic. But I would do both, frankly. I'd put it in both places because primitive use signs are different than ATV signs. So I would just keep both.
it. Yep, absolutely.
ATVs will be prohibited from traveling along Marstrands Road except specified crossing locations. Hours of operation ATVs on the site will be limited to 7 a.m. to a half hour after sunset each day. The campground reserves the right to impose additional restrictions, revoke ATV use privilege. The big question for the board is are those hours appropriate? Starting at 7 a.m., ending a half hour after sunset. You want to talk about that, Gary? Because that obviously is the question. Like, how did you arrive at that?
It was just like a polite timing to go by. We don't need people riding all night, and doesn't really. That's why I went 7 to 7. Just quiet time.
Well, wait, so 7 to 7 is different than half an hour after sunset. So
Okay, well, half an hour after sunset, whatever.
If I may, I think a lot of this basic language came from the, I forget the national organization, for campgrounds. I figure, so most of this came from a canned document that was, in use for most of the, large campgrounds in the country. So that's where that language came from. I don't think that we particularly, gave much thought to 7 a.m. to half hour for sunset. I think that's fairly standard, but certainly we can modify it if we need to.
Any board member? Yes, Mr. Fricker.
Oh, yeah. 7 a.m. is a little early, but, people like to get up and get moving. So 7 a.m. to a half an hour after sunset's okay, as far as I can see. The only other thing is that we're missing a word. The sentence before a trail map, signs will be placed at the perimeter of the defined trail limits signifying the ATV traffic must remain on trails. The word on is missing.
Good catch.
ATV traffic must remain on trails that are specifically indicated on the maps.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm personally concerned about this one, obviously, because I'm concerned about the noise and this could be one of the most destructive parts of the campground to the neighbors. It may not be if it's done correctly. So I don't think this is unfair. I just am concerned with the noise, obviously, and whether or not there's some way to, and I haven't figured it out, but if there's a way to put in here somewhere that if the noise is over a certain amount, that you take some sort of remedial action. But I don't know I don't know how to do that.
So in the statement, the very last thing says the campground reserves the right to impose additional restrictions and or revoke privileges. But I'd also say that where we've changed changed up how this process is going, that they're going to phase in the other phases, that every time they come back to the planning board, that opens up the whole application, and that gives you the opportunity to revisit these issues.
Perfect, perfect. That makes me feel more comfortable. Thank you for reminding.
Yeah. David? Matt?
Yes.
Do we anywhere in here define what an ATV is to make a distinction between a, just a normal commercial ATV that has a muffler on it as opposed to the ATVs or UTVs that are used in running races?
Gary, what do you think about that?
Well, we're not having races, and we're trying to prove ourselves as being a good neighbor, so we're going to use common sense and have to have people with stock ATVs riding the property. We don't want a bunch of hooligans racing around through a campground. We're trying to run a good business here. So we're just going to have to prove ourselves. That's all there is to it.
So Lee, Jay, if I could, and board, correct me if you think this is overstepping. At the end of that ATV use section, I think it would be beneficial to say that there will be no ATV races put on by the camp. Well, there will be no ATV races. Two brothers racing each other. You're not going to be able to do anything about that. But I think what we're talking about is
any sanctioned races, events held up there as well. I know you. Yes.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to prevent. And then also say that all ATVs should be. I don't know how to do. I don't know the language on this, but that they wouldn't have modified exhaust systems for increased noise. I don't know what that sounds. That I don't know how to say that, but those are two additions that I think would be good.
There's state regulations on that we have to adhere by.
Okay, great. Yeah, so Lee J, if you could do something like that, and then I see hands raised. I apologize. I just wanted to try to get that out. So, Nicole, why don't you go first, and then Joe, if you have, yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. It's really hard to take minutes and raise your hand at the same time. So I guess the first thing, I was looking up latest sunsets in Baldwin because I was curious what we're really talking about half an hour after sunset, and we really don't get past 9 p.m. So I'm fine with that. That makes sense to me, and that's at the latest. And then my question, I remember this discussion coming up around snowmobiles, and I think Gary, you sort of enlightened us that requiring that snowmobiles had to be registered, right, and things like that, and that. Like if an ATV has to be registered, does that negate it from having a modified exhaust or no?
No. It has to be registered. It has to have regular exhaust to be legal to ride in the state. And
it does. So if we were to say a condition that ATVs have to be, whatever it is, have a state registration or something, that would negate any modified exhaust systems theoretically, or am I missing that?
So very quickly, what I came up with was just a statement that says all ATVs must meet state exhaust system requirements.
It's something. I don't know enough about it.
And that would be a statement that comes after there shall be no ATV sanctioned races allowed on the property.
Okay, perfect. Joe, you were next in line.
Yes, I'd like to suggest that you invite a warden to participate in the next meeting and ask the warden's advice and ask him for the wording that we might want to use. I would love to be, personally, I'd love to be educated by the warden, and I would be more likely to take his advice and feel comfortable after a warden had talked to the board on that.
I'd
All
love
right.
to have a warden. I'd love to have a warden clear this up and make it much easier for all of us.
Cool.
And-
Exactly, Gary.
And I know where we stand with them, so I'd be more than happy to have them come and speak.
Cool.
I've talked to them already.
Yeah, Gary, if you want to invite next time, we could probably get together a little list of things that may be good questions for a warden. If you want to invite, just reach out to me and let me know. If others know wardens, you can reach out and I'll let you know if we have somebody coming already. Nicole, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just had a question because I really like what you're suggesting, Joe, and having a warden, because to me, if people are bringing their own ATVs, they could be coming from all kinds of states with all kinds of different regulations. So, do you still have to be registered in Maine to bring your ATV to a campground in Maine?
Not if it's a private campground. You do not.
Okay, so then our thing about state registration probably wouldn't cover that. So yeah, I like the idea of talking to a warden. It makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
And we have starter language from Lee J that gives us it puts the concept in there, so we can put that to somebody like a warden. Anything else on ATVs that people have concerns about? Matt talked about the different variations of ATVs. Gary, do you have any expectations in terms of what type of, you have the side-by-sides, you've got the UTVs, you got the ATVs, you got dune buggies somewhere in there?
Yeah, my expectations is a bunch of families having fun on their ATVs, riding in the campground. That's what I anticipate. I don't see racing. I don't see anything like that. I see a bunch of four-wheel drives with family and friends riding.
I could, if you're so inclined, I could add a statement that says the term ATV does not include any other forms of recreational vehicles. Or does not include UTVs and other.
Oh no, UTVs are a lot of the older people ride UTVs. Families ride UTVs, which is a side-by-side. That's what we're trying to do, is have side-by-sides, four-wheelers, small dirt bikes, whatever a camper takes to the property. We're not having like races with race quads, but yeah, side-by-sides, four-wheelers, mopeds, on-off-road bikes, whatever they deem to have.
Okay. I'm old-fashioned too, Gary. I mean, to me, an ATV is a single-person, four-wheel,
An ATV is dual-person, four-wheel drive, some are two-wheel drive.
Lee J, is there another section that deals with motorcycles?
No.
Okay. I think you should add "and motorcycles" to the ATV.
I'm sorry, I am unmuted. To allow them or to prohibit them?
Allow to have the ATV use to be parallel to the motorcycle, the dirt bike or off-road motorcycle. So yeah, if we could.
So I could say
that.
something like ATV use includes dirt bikes, side-by-sides, and the like. May need to expand that a little more. I might need to do a little bit of research myself. Just to
okay. Yeah,
sure
let's put that.
Terminologies.
Yeah, and just for everybody's edification, we're trying to get as close as we can to a workable condition. Once we get all this kind of down on paper, we're all going to read it again, and it may spur on some other discussion. But if we don't do it the first time, we can't do it the second time, and each time it should be less of a discussion, frankly. So So it looks like we have about 18 minutes left. I want to keep going. I'm not saying stop, but I think somewhere around 9 o'clock, 9:05, I do think we need to end this. I don't know about you guys, but I find this exhausting to do. So I can only really do it for 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours. But does that answer your question, Nicole? Yeah. Okay. All right. Right of entry and inspection. Town of Baldwin Code Enforcement Officer and any duly designated officer and employee of the state of Maine, Health and Human Services shall have the right without administrative inspection warrant to enter the property of the campground in a reasonable time to determine compliance with this permit or any rules in force at the time. So I'd like to add, so in the first line it says, any duly designated officer or employee of the town of Baldwin and the state of Maine Department of Health and Human Services. So the fire chief can go in, the humane officer, what do we call the humane officer? Animal control officer.
The road commissioner.
The road commissioner, not that they're really, there could be a reason with regard to Marston's Road to go on part of the property, maybe a culvert or something to check compliance, but I don't think that's a prize. Gary, you're good with that, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Any other issues with subset I? J, register the proprietor shall keep and maintain or cause to be kept and maintain a register of guests. Is it registry of guests or register of guests?
Good question. I'll check on that.
Renting or occupying sites. The register may be a book, separate form of registration or card. I'd put or electronic too. I think they can do it electronically as well. Register signed by the person renting the site. The agent will I'm just reading the rest of it. I'm good with the rest of it. I mean, I don't any concerns with this. It's really just keeping a log of who's there and making sure everybody's permitted to be there and a cross-reference. Yeah, Nicole. Try again. Try again. You're still on mute.
Okay, sorry. Just the last sentence. You previously had changed that to include, any officer of the town, but it sort of just says anyone from DHHS or the CEO. I don't know if we want to change that to make it.
That's great. Any agent of the town and of the department. Good catch. I'm getting tired. This is the time to get the good stuff, right, Gary? Water analysis. A copy of the current water analysis shall be at the park, shall be at the campground, and in view of the public, a water sample shall be taken and tested and shown to be satisfactory before the campground opens for the season. Gary, how many wells do you have there?
Currently, there is 2. And we have to be tested through public drinking water. I'm dealing with Kate Tufts at the state of Maine, so we're all on board for testing.
Do you test at both wells?
We will have to test on every well on the property, yes.
So can we just put that as a reference that a copy of the current water analysis for each well or water source?
Absolutely.
For all wells.
Yeah. And that's only with regard to wells that you use. I have a couple old wells on my property that wouldn't pass inspection for anybody. Dump station, L. Dump station will be provided consisting of at least 4-inch sewer riser pipe connected to RV sewage disposal system, surrounded by an inlet, at the inlet by a 3-foot by 3-foot concrete apron sloped to drain, provided with suitable hinge cover or cap screw, a water outlet to permit periodic washdown of adjacent areas. This water outlet shall be protected with an anti-siphon backflow preventer. Sign shall be posted saying that water from this outlet is not for drinking purposes. And I don't remember, under the new system on phase 1, are you going to have a dump station?
Probably not on phase 1. That'll come into play on phase 2.
Okay, and that's in the drawings?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions there, board?
Yeah, what are the campers that come in with their RVs gonna do with their waste?
We got septics designed to be put in once we can get a permit for them.
Sorry, Matt, I didn't hear the end of your question, Matt. Could you finish that one?
If there's not a dump station, what are the RVs gonna do with their waste?
We have septics designed to put in once we get approval and can get permits to put them in.
So the campers would discharge into the septic?
Into the septic, exactly.
You mean that would be septic at the campsites, not a separate dump station?
Exactly.
Okay, all right.
Matt, you know way more about this than I do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that means that there is a septic inlet, I guess you want to call it, that you can attach your black water and gray water tank to. When you pull into your camping spot, you attach your hose and you can dump your waste and waste water right there at that specific campsite that you're parked at, as opposed to other campgrounds where they'll say, all our campsites offer are water and electric. We don't have any on-site sewage facilities, but we have a dump station that you can drive to.
Okay,
So,
good. Oh, that's great. Nickel, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, so it seems like then maybe it makes sense for us to have a condition that for phase 1 that those septic systems need to be in place. That Gary was discussing.
Yeah, let's just mark that. I think that comes down the road, but let's mark that as an issue to return to. Josiah.
Yeah, this, I'm going to go back to my get the warden in thing. Is there somebody from the state that can come and explain this to us about campgrounds and about septic systems and what the requirements are? I mean, it just seems to me that you are a local board with no expertise beyond Matt going to campsites. What are the main laws? What governs it? Can somebody from the state tell us?
Yeah, Lee J, can you actually check on that just to make sure that that's kosher? Can you do some research on that just to make sure? It actually sounds to me, Joe, that they're actually going overboard on the level of septic that they're providing, that they're actually providing more septic resources than is ordinarily provided by like a remote dump station. So it actually sounds like they're doing more than what's required on phase one.
I'm not necessarily objecting. As I said before, I support a 174 campsite campground. I just I'm more and more concerned with the honesty and legality of these people.
Yeah. So Lee J, if you could, Gary, you don't have to respond. Lee J, if you could
I'd like
check
to
that out.
respond. I'm getting sick of this.
But it's gonna digress if you respond. But if you want to, go ahead. It's just gonna digress.
No, just move forward. Keep
I'm
it up.
moving forward. I'm
Thank you.
moving forward. So garbage and rubbish. Garbage collection points will be installed, maintained, number of locations within the campground. Most garbage collection points will be dumpsters, while smaller receptacles may be installed as well. Garbage and rubbish will be kept in durable, insect-proof containers that do not leak or absorb liquid and do not absorb liquid. Plastic bags, wet-strength paper bags may be used to line these containers. All containers provide tight-fitting lids. Campground will provide a sufficient number of containers to hold all the garbage and rubbish which accumulates during the period of removal. And I think the only thing to add here was there was some discussion about just commenting that these were, I don't know the term, animal proof. And I think that was the intent of being sufficient, such they were not, particularly the dumpsters were secure from animal intrusion. I don't mean like mice, I mean like bears or you know.
Yep, I can add that wording into that statement.
Great.
Not a problem.
Anything else from that? All right. Swimming pool. The campground will contain a large swimming pool. It will be constructed and operated in accordance with all state rules applicable to swimming pools. And there are, a whole bunch of rules. I guess I'm not interested in listing all of those rules, particularly because they change and the CUP is not going to change. I'm generally okay with this. Mr. Sanborn.
This is a question for Wes. What's the code for fencing around a swimming pool? I'm just curious.
Would you ask that again? I didn't quite get it clearly.
I was just curious what the rule is or code is for fencing around a swimming pool.
The ordinance has no rule. It's understood that you don't want derelict people or strangers wandering in the dark and falling in the pool. I think it's more of an insurance company issue.
Yeah, I guess my only point. Can I finish what I was saying? My only point is I assume that Gary's going to have a fence around it. I was under the impression that a lot of the towns around here do not have a code for fencing around swimming pools, so I think it should be stated and added.
I believe the plan shows a chain link fence around the pool. So the plan has already stated that they will be providing chain link fencing around that.
Hey, Gary, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we have to have a 4-foot tall chain link fence around it with self-closing gates.
And that's state? Is that state?
I believe so. It's normal procedure. That's what the pool company told us to do. That's what everybody's telling us to do, is a 4-foot tall fence with self-closing gates.
So let's add at the end of that sentence, the second sentence, it'll be constructed and operated in accordance with all state rules applicable to pools and consistent with the submission. So if Governor LePage comes back and decides to strike all of those rules, we still have a fence. Park amenities and services limited to paying guests. The park amenities, services, and activities will be available only to campers and guests. The park is not open for use by the general public. The campground intends to offer a variety of amenities, services, and activities, including, and then there's a list. So I'm pretty good at reading hot button issues. The words "and guests" is probably one of those. Can the applicant talk about what they mean by "and guests"?
Well, if somebody comes to the campsite and they have family that wants to come over, 1 or 2 per site, it's not gonna be an issue, but we're not opening it up to the public to just have people run through. People at campgrounds have guests to stop over. It's not a abnormal procedure.
Nicole?
And just because I don't go to a lot of campgrounds, is there a limit on the number of guests someone can have? Like, is it X number, or is it limited by number of cars? How is it sort of managed to not be a big deal?
Well, we're gonna try to be inviting, but we can't be overrun with guests and extra cars. So we're gonna say 2 guests per site. But if somebody shows up with husband and wife and a kid, we're not gonna turn them away. If they show up with 7 or 8, absolutely, that's not correct.
So board, how do you want to address this? So the first phase is how many sites? 60?
Yes.
So two extra people per site, another 120 another 120 people on property. I'm just using that as a touchstone for discussion, Gary. I'm not saying that's so, 120 people more on the property. Or do you have any concerns, comments, questions about that?
Yeah, so David?
Yes.
So I'd like to use some consistent language and definitions throughout the document to distinguish registered campers versus guests. Because here in O, we're talking about available only to campers and guests. But you go down one to I, swimming, and it says swimming lessons will be offered to guests and taught by a certified instructor. So we need to have a clear definition of, registered campers who, they're the ones who are paying to be there, and then guests of those registered campers. Because when you go down to swimming, it should actually say swimming lessons will be offered to registered campers. I don't know whether you want to offer it to their guests or not, but we're going back and forth between people who are registered campers there, and then sometimes actually calling those registered campers guests of the campground. So we're going to get confused.
Agreed. So let's just put a stick in the sand and say that people who pay to come to the campground are called registered guests, and people who come onto the property who are not registered guests are just plain old guests. Does that work? Or do you want to use a different word?
Are you looking to add that terminology to these findings, or should we just make sure that in the final version of the findings that we're consistent with registered campers versus guests?
We could do that as well. That's another way to say it.
Yeah.
Now, Gary. Oh, sorry. Who wants to talk?
I like the term registered campers versus guests who are not registered, and they're not, they're guests of registered campers.
Does that work for you, Gary?
I mean, everybody's technically be registered. All guests are going to have to sign in as well. So they will be registered as well. a guest can't just walk onto the property. They're gonna have to be, signed in, so they'd be registered per se.
Yeah, I think we do just need to term those two. I mean, look, there's some gray areas between the two. If an RV pulls up with 10 people inside the RV, they're all registered guests. If only 2 of them are in the RV when they get there and the other 8 show up later, then they're 2 registered guests and 2 registered campers and 8 guests. So, I mean, it gets pretty gray. Like, there's only so much we can do. There's language is not that precise, nor is reality. So let's call the people who pay to go to the campsite and who are part of the group who rent the space registered campers. And the people who are not there to sleep overnight and come because maybe their family, we will call them guests. And that should be consistent throughout.
You could call them guests or visitors.
Board, raise your hand if you want to call them guests. Raise your hand if you want to call them visitors. Matt, what do you want to call them? You're the tying vote. Visitors or guests?
What would Gary like to call them?
Yes.
So be it.
Yes.
All right. It's 9:05. We did not make the level of progress that I hoped. And I apologize because the Van Hertel discussion took longer than I expected. So we didn't make it as far as I hoped. We're still making progress, just not as quickly as I hoped.
Could we
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Gary.
Could we be put first on the agenda for next time and not skipped over again like we were tonight?
Yes. Although I can't promise you the whole time, but I can promise you a bigger bulk of it than we did this time. That was not my intent. So I will, and I only have so much power, right? I mean, I'm the cruise director, but there's a lot of other people on the cruise. Yes, we will endeavor to give you more time. My expectation is more than an hour next time, possibly even an hour and a half if we can get that much time in. So the bulk of the meeting should be devoted to this. Lee J, I think we continue with what you're doing. Don't publish anything yet. And my hope would be to get through this document. We have 6 more pages next meeting.
Right, and I'm not touching anything until we're done, and then I will go back and make all of the edits from these meetings.
Right. Yeah, Gary, you had your finger raised.
Go ahead, continue. I'm sorry.
No, that's all I had. I mean,
All right. All set.
Okay. Anything else that we need to accomplish today before we sign off? Taffy, nice that you could join the electronic meeting. Nice to see you. All right. Dwight, do we have anything from your end? You can shake your head. You don't have to unmute if you don't have anything. He's on mute. Let me see if I can unmute you. There you go. Anything else, Dwight? You're unmuted now.
No, I think you've got some good points and stuff to go over here on the stuff. I think it's time that we go to the lawyer and get an interpretation of some of this stuff. And I think one person ought to be talking to the lawyer to get the interpretation and not have everybody else's opinions and get this done and behind us.
We're trying. This is a big project, so I mean, we're trying. But I will call the lawyer. I'll call you, Dwight, first, and we'll talk about who I should talk to before I make the call, if it's David Laurie or if it's somebody else. Anything else? All right. Danielle is back on, so I am going to click the end of the meeting. Well, I'm sorry. Can I entertain a motion to adjourn? Oh, yes, Nicole.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Vote. All in
Third.
favor? All right, we're off. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good and safe time.
Thank you. Good job, Dave.